This podcast is brought to you by Most Valuable Podcasts, leading the league in podcasting entertainment.
What's up, everybody? Ricky Widmer here, along with the one, the only, Brandon Swanson.
Hey.
And we are back. Welcome back into the Primetime Podcast here on Most Valuable Podcast. If you're joining us again, welcome back. If you are new, this is the podcast here at MVP, where we talk about the best sports news in the world of college football. And Brandon, we are continuing our journey. We have been on a journey since, I want to say, the middle of June.
It feels like we started last year.
Yes, where we started our Power 5 previews. We have gone through most of them. We have 2 Power 5 conferences left. We've got the Pac-12, which we are starting today, and then in 2 weeks we'll do the Big 12, and we will be done with our previews, getting ready for the season that is just a little over a month away now, as we will have games at the end of August to enjoy for college football. And we are going to look at today the Pac-12 conference, like I said, but we're going to look at the South today. We'll look at the North tomorrow, next week, not tomorrow, next week, and then we'll do the Big 12. But Brandon, the way that this works, if you are new, is we start from the bottom, we go to the top. So we're going to start with Arizona. We'll end with Colorado. And I want to get right into it. The Arizona Wildcats. And usually I come into this like, okay, Brandon, where do you want to start? Because usually I am throwing a question to you to start these. But I actually came in and I was like, you know what? I know where I want to start this one. And for Arizona, I think it is just, it's like a sore thumb. It's just painfully obvious where we need to start coming into this year. And that's the defense. This is a team that in 8 Pac-12 losses last year allowed 44.8 points per game. Now, Rich Rod is bringing in 2 new defensive coaches, but the defensive line is still very undersized. You have a linebacking group that is very freshman-laden. This is a team that, if they want to do well or improve on last year, it really starts with the defense. You can't be giving up 44.8 points per game and expect to win those games and have your offense kind of score more than the defense lets up.
Ricky, I completely agree with you. And one thing I want to throw out there to you before we really get going here is, would you believe that 3 years ago, the same Arizona Wildcats, well, they're really not the same because of how the team has changed, but
won the South.
They were playing for the Pac-12 championship against Oregon.
Yep.
3 years ago. 3 years ago, and last year they got just 1 win in the conference. I mean, that's crazy to me. And the last time that they were 3-9 or had that few wins, Mike Stoops was the coach. I mean, it just, that's how kind of far Arizona fell last year. At 1-8, 3-9 overall. They couldn't win games. And I think a big part of that is kind of what you brought up, was the defense. I mean, offenses hit 66% of their passes, completed 66% of their. I mean, that's an outstanding number.
When I'm looking at quarterbacks, I've said it on previews before, when it's like, well, he's right around that 60 number, which is good. 66 is well above that 60 number that I look for in a completion percentage.
66 is incredible. And then 3,300 yards and 34 touchdowns against that defense. And they only picked off 8 passes, and 5 of those 8 passes that were picked off were in the first 4 games. So there wasn't a whole lot of activity in the middle to end of the season. There wasn't a whole lot of great things going on for this Arizona defense last year. Weren't a whole lot of good things, but one bright spot coming back this year is safety Demetrius Flanagan-Foles, who was the leading tackler last year, will return this year, and that's going to be a big plus for them. But you would like to think that this defense can't go any farther backwards. That there really only is one way up for them, and it's going up. You know, there's only one way to go, and it's up.
Well,
and I think that
you're almost at rock bottom.
These Rich Rodriguez defenses, that had been so good at one point, those need to return. And they need to return quickly, because if Arizona wants to be able to try and get back to form, and I don't think that they're going to get back to form this year. I don't think that that's going to be possible at all. But for them to be able to make strides to get to that point, they really need to start quickly with that defense. I mean, you look at the games that they had. I mean, it was a stretch of 7-8 games where they lost.
Yeah.
And the amount of points that they gave up, and in some of the games they were somewhat competitive. I mean, you can look at some of them and they were in it, but then you have games where it's like, oh my gosh.
The only one that I'm looking at, and this is from Final Score, there were some games where obviously when you're watching the game, you're like, oh, they're in it for some point, and then the other team just pulls away. But if I am looking just at score, the only Pac-12 game that they were in last year was the one against Washington where they lost 35-28 in overtime. Everything else, 45-24, 36-23.
You could say that they're in that one. 36-23, you could say that they're in that one.
I'll give you 13.1, but 34-10. The Washington State one 63-7. You're not in that game. 69-7. 49-24, then 42-17. It was maybe if I give you the Utah game, you're in 2 games. 2 of your 8 Pac-12 losses you're in those games. The rest of them you're out, and one of them was a 69-7 loss. You just can't have that, because the thing that it does is it puts pressure on the offense. If you're not doing well defensively, it puts that pressure on the offense to where I don't care if you're completing over 65% of your passes coming into this season, because if your team is letting up that many points on the other side, you kind of have to either keep up with that or you're going to lose in those games. So to me, yeah, we usually talk about offense, and that's usually what we hit first, but when you're giving up that many points, then on the offensive side, they were last in the Pac-12 in scoring last year. That together, those don't put together a resume for winning in a Power 5 conference.
I completely agree with you. You can't continue to have games like that or stretches of 8 losses like you did. But at the same time, I think that we have to give it to Arizona that there were so many injuries on this team. Offense, defense, there were injuries galore. They really didn't have a chance. And I think that that's why a lot of people will give last season, they'll say that Rich Rodriguez is going to be on the hot seat come this year. But I think at the same time, he's not going to be the guy on the hottest seat, because you take a look at last season, and as a whole, as a body, you didn't play that well. But at the same time, you weren't playing with the guys that you started the season with. You weren't playing, with healthy running backs. You saw with Nick Wilson and J.J. Taylor and all these, just and Zach Green, another one that the injury bug hit those guys. But if it doesn't, they have a really strong running back core. They've got a really strong running game, and that's probably going to be the strongest piece of the offense for them, is going to be at running back. And if they can stay healthy, they'll be able to carry this team, and I think that they'll do a good job of that. But then you look at the quarterback position, and you could go with a number of different guys there. Brandon Dawkins is a guy who I think would be one of the most likely candidates, because he was kind of thrown in last year again, when injuries occurred. And they also have Khalil Tate there. I think those two will be the ones to battle it out, but you just never know.
Well, and that's the thing. Right now for the quarterback position, they got to make a decision, because when spring practices ended, we had a 2-dog race for the quarterback position. It was either Brandon Dawkins or Khalil Tate. And they were in and I'm using the quote here from Athlon Sports, in a too close to call battle for that quarterback position. And yes, you'd come in and Dawkins was kind of thrown in there, but he's also had injuries the past 2 seasons. He's been sidelined with injuries 3 times in the past 2 years. The guy that I think that, like you said, that this offense needs to kind of rely on is the tailback, and that's J.J. Taylor. He's got to be the one, although he's only a sophomore, he's the one that I look at to kind of say, okay, I want to see what you can do this year, because I look at the stats last year. And your leading rusher was Brandon Dawkins, who had almost 1,000 yards.
And that's your quarterback.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that if you want to go with a guy who's going to be solid, and I say solid because he only, I think, attempted on average 18 passes per game or something kind of small like that. He made up for it in the running game. I think he averaged 94 rushing yards per game. So he was able to do it, on both sides, with his legs, with his arm, and things like that. And obviously with his legs, he was more effective. But I think knowing that you have that is going to make it even easier to make a decision to go with him, at least to start the season.
It's funny. The games before the USC game, because he didn't play in that one. So you've got Grambling State to Utah. The most passes he thrown was 31. The least that he threw in a game was 17. That was UCLA. Others were 29, 21, and 20. Ever since the USC game to end the season, in games that he played significant amounts in, 15. 5 of 15, 9 of 19, 10 of 17. So nowhere near what he was doing. However, when you see the rushing attempts in those games, 17, 18, 15 from your quarterback. I think that it's good to have a guy that is explosive and can hurt you either with the run or the pass. However, the thing you've got to kind of you got to think about is, do you want a guy who it's like, okay, he's a runner and teams are not going to be afraid of his passing ability? Because when I look at games like that, 10 for 17, 9 for 19, 5 for 15, I think some teams might say, okay, well, we're going to defend the pass, but load up on the run. Make sure he doesn't leave the pocket. Make sure we load up on the run and stop him there, to where you got to have that quarterback that can say, oh, okay, you're going to try to stop me on the run. You got to respect my pass. And if they're not able to do that, it's going to equal 3 and outs, and that's going to equal the defense coming back on the field. The defense is going to get more tired. They're going to put up more points, and you're in the same kind of system you were last year.
I think you what you need to do, though, as a quarterback for Brandon Dawkins, is what he needs to be able to do is he needs to be a better passer. That's what it comes down to. You already know what you have in him as a running, as basically a running back. I wanted to say a running back. He's not a running back. He's a quarterback. But you know what you have in him. He needs to be able to develop into that quarterback. That quarterback, the guy who can stay in the pocket. But then the offensive line needs to give him the time to be able to do so. And that's another thing is, if this offensive line can come out and do some good things, then your running backs stay healthy. You're able to open up some really good holes for them, and you're able to take some pressure off your quarterback, who's going to need some time to be able to find his guys, make some reads, and complete those passes that he just wasn't doing last year. So I think that's going to be one of the things for him where he needs to most improve. That's simple. That is a simple spot where you can look at it and go, well, you have to just improve at the quarterback position. But I'll be very interested to see if we can get an entire Arizona Wildcats season this next year where we don't see too many injuries, because then that's going to give us a very, very good look of how they are, of how good they are or how bad they are in a certain sense. So that's what needs to happen, is the injury bug needs to stay away from Arizona. And it's obviously you cannot say, just stay away, take a pill, you won't get injured. But
apple a day keeps the injury drug away. That's what I've always heard.
Yeah. It doesn't always work out that way, but that's what's going to need to happen for them. They're going to have to stay healthy, and they're going to just have to produce. That's what it comes down to. That's what it comes down to. It's so simple to say. It's so hard to put into practice. But Rich Rodriguez, he needs to be able to come back to form as this coach that he was hired on as. I was
going to say that this is an important year for Rich Rod and the Arizona Wildcats, because he came in 8-5, 8-5, then boom, that 10-4 season where they were 7-2 in the Pac-12, loses to Oregon State in the championship game, goes to the Fiesta Bowl, loses that game, and then kind of ever since, it was a 7-6 year where they didn't do well in conference. Then last year, which was totally awful. If you're an Arizona fan, you're not happy seeing your team bottom of the conference, only one win, which you won. Yeah, you beat your rival in Arizona State. So, I mean, there's a little bit where it's like, woo, we got them. But you're still 1-8 and 3-9 overall. This is an important season to see if he can bounce back. And the one thing I want to say to kind of catch the Tony Reales out there who are going to correct me in the comment section, when I talked about J.J. Taylor, he's not going to be the only running back. Senior Nick Wilson will be there also, but Taylor is also a guy that has struggled with injuries where he missed 8 games with a broken ankle as well. So he's going to come in and we're going to say, can he stay healthy? The question, I think, and this is the last question I kind of want to end this with, is we've talked about Brandon Dawkins. However, I know that you look at Khalil Tate and it's like, okay, he's got similar tendencies to Dawkins. Is there a chance that this coaching staff, of course, it's going to be one in fall practices before the season. Like this could be a situation where we've talked about with numerous teams in our preview that they might not make a decision until mid-August to who their starter is going to be. Could we see a situation where they go, you know what? We like what Dawkins brings on the ground, but we're not completely sold with it. Let's go with the sophomore and Khalil Tate.
No, absolutely not. Why would they go with Khalil Tate? Because Khalil Tate has done nothing to impress anybody, I don't think. I mean, if you look at his numbers from what he did last year, there was nothing impressive there. There was nothing impressive there that would make me go, he has to go in over Dawkins. You actually lose out, I think, if you go with Tate, not Dawkins. And we haven't even, talked about being able to see the freshman who could be coming out, Kahari Lane, and I do believe I'm saying that right, but if a Miami fan's watching, I'm sure they'll correct us. But I think that there's no reason. There's no reason why you don't go with Dawkins, because not that he was great through the air, but he had much more to bring to the table. He was the guy that they went with first, and when the injury happened last year to Solomon, and then what he brings in the running game, it's when you look at a guy like a Jalen Hurts, for a small example, is that he's a good passer, but he's a great runner. And he brings both things to the table. With Tate, you get an average passer and a guy who doesn't run a whole lot. With Dawkins, you get a guy who runs a lot and is very successful doing it. And a guy who, let's give him some more time, and he can be an effective passer. So that's why I don't think there's a question here. I think Dawkins is your main man, and then you just hope he stays healthy and he can repeat his rushing numbers and add on to his passing numbers. Now remember, he didn't start every game last year.
Yeah.
He didn't do that. So that's what people need to remember as well.
Well, and here's another thing to put into the quarterback situation is this isn't a conversation like we had when you mentioned Miami, where we had the one quarterback that was, this is the grizzled vet, the other one is the newcomer, but the newcomer actually shows promise and you can see that tangible result on the field. The thing that hurts Arizona in this quarterback battle is that, like Brandon Dawkins is obviously the more explosive on the field, especially with his running ability. But I think no matter which one you put in, like if I'm Rich Rodriguez, whether it's Dawkins, whether it's Tate, that person alone does not give me more touchdowns than my quarterbacks had last year. 3 for Tate, 8 for Dawkins last year. Neither one on their own is going to give me more passing touchdowns and more points. It's going to take a team effort. And the thing that I think with this Arizona kind of as a whole for this season is what's going to be important, and why I said this is an important year for Rich Rodriguez, is he's got a contract buyout at the end of this year that would be $5.1 million. If their new athletic director in Dave Hickey wants to make a change, buy him out for $5.1 million, that change can happen at the end of this year. And if I see another 3-win season where you're only winning 1 in the Pac-12, I don't know why Dan Hickey wouldn't make that change. However, this roster, although it doesn't look good for this year, because it's young, you can build it up for next year, and 2018 could be a better and more promising year than 2017. Arizona has all the chances in the world to have a more successful season. They could sweep non-conference because we don't know how Houston's going to be with losing their quarterback from last year, losing their head coach and most of their staff from last year. They get a new coach coming in, and then it's the Pac-12. Yeah, you get Oregon State, which could be an easy win. That one's at home. You beat Arizona State last year. Cal could be a game where I could see them winning. I don't know if I'm ready to crown them in that game, but I could possibly at best see a 6-win season here in this schedule. However, at best, I think it's going to be another 3 or 4 win season, and then Hinkie is going to have to make a decision. Do I buy out Rich Rodriguez, or do I let him work with this team for a promising 2018?
I think a successful season for Arizona would be 7 wins. If they got to 7 wins, I think they'd be pretty darn happy. And I think that we need to also remember that last season, we can't go off this season by looking at last season completely because of the injuries. There were injuries all over the field. If this team can stay mainly healthy, I don't think 6 or 7 wins is out of the question. I just don't think it is. You'd like to think that they're going to be Northern Arizona and UTEP. If a win against Houston to start off 3-0 would be very big. Cal, I think that's a team that they could beat. Oregon State is kind of up there in the air.
Oregon State and Arizona, I could see them easily winning those.
And Arizona State, most likely they don't beat Oregon, but we don't know what Oregon's going to be like. They weren't all that great last year, but they have a new coach. They have a kind of a new team this year. So that'll be interesting to see. And then Washington State as well. They were good last year, but are they going to be the same?
Washington
as
State
what they
was
were
also the team that blew them out 69-7 last year.
You want to avenge that 69-7 loss. But I think Arizona could definitely see 6 wins. If the team stays healthy and they're able to do what they wanted to do last year, I think that they could see 6, maybe even 7 wins, 7 being the cap for this year. But they certainly do need to be better. Not only stay away from the injury bug, but they need to be better in a number of different positions.
Well, and this is where we're going to turn the conversation on to you guys. Let us know down below in the comment section. What do you guys feel for the Arizona Wildcats coming into this season? Who are you taking at quarterback? What are some big players that you are looking to contribute this year? And also, I'll throw out the question. I didn't throw it out completely to Brandon, but I'll throw it out to you guys. Is this a season where Rich Rod's basically coaching for his job? Like, if they get to another 3 or 4 win season, do you see the buyout coming into effect and you guys getting a new coach next season? Let us know down below in the comment section. But Brandon, we're going to move on into the next team. And this is a team, I'll be honest, like every time we run through these standings, it's like, okay, who's the next team? I keep forgetting that this team was so low in the standings that they were at 2-7 in the conference, 4-8 overall. And we're talking about the UCLA Bruins. And to get right into it, the starting point for this team is very obvious. You got to start from the quarterback here. This is a guy that both you and I have talked about coming into this season for the 2018 NFL draft is going to be a guy we talk about in mock drafts going forward this season, is going to be looking to kind of have a redemption story for 2017 because we loved him as a freshman, did great things. Then as a sophomore, shoulder injury plagued his season all last year. And now, after being 100% at spring practices, he's looking to basically be that quarterback that we saw 2 years ago in 2015 in his freshman season. So I'm just going to, very plain and simple, Brandon, is this going to be the year for UCLA where they do better because Josh Rosen does better, and will we see improvements from the junior quarterback?
Yeah, I think we will. I think that if he's able to stay healthy and he keeps the injury away, I think that he's going to return to form in what he was as a freshman. And he was really good. I mean, he was very, very good as a freshman, and people had really high hopes for him last year. And then, unfortunately, all he had in him was 6 games before he got injured and then lost for the season. And I think that with him coming back, there's a lot on the line for him. there's a lot on the line for him because right now, who are people talking about for the 2018 NFL draft? Sam Darnold. They're not talking about Josh Rosen.
I think that, this one they're talking about, Darnold's at the top. He's the prized pony. However, after him, it's not Josh Rosen. They immediately go to Allen.
Allen.
The kid from Wyoming.
And it's not Josh Rosen because he got injured. And NFL teams start to look at that and they go, injury, this guy's injury. You know, even if you have one injury, you're injury plagued then. I mean, that's what you can be labeled as. And it can hurt you. I mean, it can cost you millions of dollars these days. But Josh Rosen, what he needs to focus on doing to put himself back on the map is having one hell of a junior campaign. And I think he'll be able to do that. Look at what he did as a freshman. Look at what he did as a freshman. And then I have no doubt in my mind that if this offensive line is able to get better, and they need to be better because there were 0 100-yard games for running backs on the ground last year, and running backs averaged under 3 yards a carry. If this offensive line opens up more holes, gives Allen time, doesn't allow him to get beat up. Rosen. Gives Rosen time. He will be very good yet again.
Well, and that's the big thing. The whole kind of, there is, from UCLA fans coming into the year, there's kind of optimism behind Josh Rosen because I look at, you mentioned the numbers from that 2015 campaign. In case you guys aren't looking at them, 3,670 yards, 23 touchdowns, only 11 INTs. That phenomenal. On top of a 60% completion rating. I look at completion percentage, I meant, not rating. But then you look at I know injuries, but just under 2,000 yards. However, you still look at his touchdown to interception ratio, 10-5. He still is a 2-to-1 interception ratio, which to me coming out, I mean, his completion percentage dropped by 0.7, but whatever, it's close to 60%. The big thing for Josh Rosen will be, can he stay healthy? Because if he's not able to stay healthy, UCLA will not have a successful season without him. And that's not saying that the team is decimated and he's the only one there. He is just that good. He is that good. And with the offensive line, they got to keep him upright, but also when it looks to running the football, this is a team that only averaged 2.93 yards per carry last season. That is, you can't have that. I would what I would love to see is double that. I want to see almost 6 yards per carry, if not 6 point something yards per carry from my running back. So on offense, I kind of look at it and I go, the Achilles heel, yet again, is going to be that offensive line. Yeah, they only lost one starter, which is a good thing, but they need to improve, like you said, because if they can't, Josh Rosen could get injured again. That's the worst case scenario for a quarterback that cannot stay healthy. Look at Jay Cutler in his time. We're here in Chicago. Jay Cutler's a prime example. Didn't have an offensive line. How often was he injured here in Chicago? Every other Tuesday was basically Jay Cutler injury report for
so thank goodness they don't
season.
Play on Tuesday, but it would be
that's where the press conferences were that week for the NFL. However, Josh Rosen, if they can keep him protected, I think he can get back to those 2015 numbers. And I look at the schedule, he has some winnable games. Texas Tech, he can win that one. Hawaii, Memphis can easily win. This team could start out 0-3 if Josh Rosen is healthy. And then we get to the Pac-12 play. Arizona could be a winnable game. Oregon, a winnable game. They could beat Cal. They can beat Utah. They can beat Arizona State. With a healthy Josh Rosen, the only 3 games it comes down to for me is Colorado, Washington, and USC. It's the only 3 games I look at for, that's going to be a tough one because of the teams that they're going to be going up against.
Those are the easy ones to just point out. I think that this team has a real potential of winning 10 games this year. And if they do that, it's a very successful season. And if they do that, they're really going to be competitive on their side of the Pac-12. I'll tell you what, is that we talked about, when we just talked about Arizona and Rich Rodriguez being a guy on the hot seat, I'll tell you another guy who's on the hot seat. It's this guy.
Jim Mora.
It's Jim Mora. I mean, Jim Mora's been doing this at UCLA for what, now 6 years or so? It's time to get your team moving in the Pac-12 championship game and then potentially a playoff berth. You know, I mean, I think it's kind of that time. And with all the mix-ups and shake-ups with coaching and coaches here and there, offensive, defensive sides of the ball, it's time. And you don't know what you're going to have after Josh Rosen is gone. So, and he's going to be gone after this year. I mean, there's no doubt.
Well, there's only one, in my mind, there's only one way Josh Rosen stays for a senior year.
If he gets injured.
If he gets injured. That's it. If he's injured and his draft stock is going to fall, let's say out of the first round, he'll stay for a senior year. But if you have a successful year this year like you want to have, then you're going to say, well, you know what? We're basically going to be losing him at the end of this year. And the thing with, when it comes to Jim Mora that I find interesting is that it felt like to me, especially during the last 2 years, because I know he had the 9-5, 10-3, 10-3, and then 8-5. Then this last 4-6 with Rosen, I kind of feel like he missed an opportunity. Because you had the opportunity to kind of, I don't want to say win over LA, win over California, because when I think of UCLA and I think of USC, I kind of think of the same conversation we have for the Lakers and the Clippers. Yeah, the Clippers might be good right now, but it'll always be Laker country. I kind of feel the same way when it comes to these two teams where, yeah, UCLA was a better team. They didn't have the scandal. They didn't have the sanctions against them. But it's really, LA is really USC country. Like, they're the more popular team among people. And I feel like at the end of this, could we be looking at Jim Mora saying, he missed it. He missed the chance to make this team into something and really capitalize off of when USC wasn't able to compete for postseason play. We're not able to compete for any of the national championships. And now that basically they can, we're now looking at it where he's got to look across town, and really it's, you look at his quarterback and his team. Yeah, his quarterback's good. His team, though, their story is a redemption story. Can they do better than last year? Where he's looking across town at USC, their quarterback is already being named right now as the number 1 pick in the draft, the best prospect for this year coming into the 2018 season. And there is some high praise for the Trojans that they could be college football playoff bound this year.
We want to keep talking about Josh Rosen, so let's talk about a little bit last year before he got hurt. Against Texas A&M, he threw for 343 yards. He had 3 picks in that game. Want to cut down on those. 307 against BYU, 350 against Arizona, 400 against Arizona State. That could be him every game. If he's out there on the field, that's what you're going to get every game from him. That should put you in a really good position to win. And then what the side of the football that we really haven't touched on a whole lot yet is the defense. The secondary last year was solid. The run D was fine, but they have a pretty solid defense, UCLA does. The line should be really strong if the young guys step up, and I think that they will. The linebacking core, again, pretty young, but good enough, I think, to get the job done. And then the secondary could be among the best in the Pac-12 with guys like safety Jaleel Wadood and Adarius Pickett. I think that these guys will be able to get the job done. And if Rosen is doing what he does when healthy, this team will be at the top. This team will be at the top, but they've got to stay healthy.
Are you saying of the South or of maybe...
The South.
Okay.
The South, that's what we're talking about.
I didn't know I don't know if we were going into a national kind of side of it of this team will be at the top of, let's say, the top 25 ranking.
No. This team will be at the top of the South fighting with USC, but they'll put themselves right up there.
I think that this division this year could come down to, like, Colorado to me, yeah, they won it last year, but Colorado's a team that I kind of feel like could take a step back. And the only reason I'm saying could take a step back is that UCLA takes a big step forward and kind of fights to where I see this division coming down to the Battle of LA. Whoever wins that UCLA USC game,
Battle of Los Angeles,
Battle
terrible
of Los Angeles,
movie, by the way.
Or
Terrible movie.
Basically if we're gonna go with kind of like the boxing fight matchup, because we got Mayweather McGregor coming up in August, if we're gonna basically title it Rosen versus Darnold in that game, going head to head, that's what it's gonna come down to. I feel like whoever wins that game will win the South, and whether that is 10 wins, whether it's not 10 wins, the only thing schedule-wise I look at USC and I have qualms about is the games that I listed. However, Colorado and Stanford are two that I look at where right now I'd give them wins for the Bruins because I like Josh Rosen, when he's healthy, can make this team one of the best teams in the Pac-12. My big thing, though, is that Washington game. It is at Washington, and if they lose that, and then on top of the USC game, if they lose those two, there's no way that they are going to win the Pac-12 South. And if they lose that Washington game, then it's like, well, you know what? Now we really have to win that Trojan game, because if we don't, then it's like we're really in we have the 8 ball against us. And then you look at the Trojan schedule. We're going to get to them later. I just want to mention this, though. They don't have to play Washington. They don't have to play that tough team. The toughest team, conference-wise, that they have to play other than you is Colorado. So that is one thing that could hurt the Bruins, is that their schedule compared to the team they're going to be going up against in the South is a lot tougher than the USC Trojans.
November 18th is a very important date for UCLA. Mm-hmm. It's very important for USC as well, but it's very important for UCLA, especially when you say, Ricky, about the fact that UCLA seems to have the tougher schedule compared to USC, and those are going to be the two teams I think that are going to be vying for the top spot on this side of their conference. And it's going to be close. I mean, that whoever wins that one is, like you said, they're most likely going to win that side of the conference. And one point I want to make before we wrap it up on UCLA is we talked about, the running backs having to have a bigger role, and they have to have a bigger role this year to be able to take some pressure off of Rosen, so it's not all him. You want him to go out there and throw for 300 plus yards each game, but sometimes he may just not. Your running backs, the running game has to pick you up. So rushing yards last year, opponents had over 2,000 rushing yards. UCLA just had over 1,000.
Now, the question I want to ask you with that, is this an issue of the running backs need to step up, or does this go back to an issue we mentioned earlier where if the offensive line is more solid, opens up more holes, then the running backs can do their job better?
It all works together in tandem. The running backs still have to step up. They still have to be better than... They still have to be better than what they were last year.
Brandon's getting so excited. He's knocking everything over there.
But it does have a lot to do with the offensive line. Rosen staying healthy has a lot to do with the offensive line.
Yeah.
Don't think that, it just comes down to the running back. The offensive line is so important. They are critical to the success of this offense, this team. But I think at the same time, the running backs, they need to, at the same time, be able to create some things on their own, create some running space on their own. The good running backs will do that, but the offensive line needs to be able to open up a lot more holes for them. My
kind of final bottom line for this team is the two things that it's going to come down to for a successful season. Number one's the offensive line. Number two is Josh Rosen's health. If both of those things work out, UCLA should win most of their games. The only two that I kind of, like I said, question about are Washington and USC. However, at the end of everything, depending on, like, even if Rosen plays the entire year and is not injured, I still have this team finishing second in the South, one game behind the Trojans. I think this is going to be a fight for the South between the two LA teams, and it will be a California-dominated Pac-12 South at the top, with UCLA being one of them. But before I kick it on to them, Brandon, any final thoughts that you want to give out about the Bruins? This is where you guys come in. You guys know the deal. We dish it off to you guys for your opinion. Let us know what you think about Josh Rosen. Is he going to stay healthy the entire year? What is your big key for this team to win? And are they going to win the Pac-12 South, or will they fall short to the USC Trojans, who seem to be the favorite coming into this year for the South? Let us know down below in the comment section. And Brandon, let's move on into our next team. It will be the Arizona State Sun Devils. ASU will be the next one on the docket. And with this one, we're going to kind of, it's funny, both Arizona teams in this conference, we're starting them off the same way. And we're looking at the defensive side of the ball, which is, if you're not new to the Primetime Podcast, you're like, whoa, guys, wait a second. You guys usually start with offense. Are you guys feeling okay? You've started two teams off with the defensive side now, but this is a team kind of like their brothers from the same state as them. They have some changes coming to the defensive side. And for me, the big change is that they're bringing in a veteran coordinator in Phil Bennett to kind of take over this defense that finished last nationally in passing yards allowed for each of the past two seasons. I'll just ask you this. Can Bennett coming over from Baylor, he did the same thing for Baylor when he was there with Art Briles, can he come in and make this defense anything special? Because I look at that and I go, you know, it's a Big 12. Like, I look at the stereotypical, like, really, we're bringing in a Big 12 coordinator to work on the defense? Because we all know in the Big 12 they don't play defense. It's just all air raid offenses out there. So do you have any confidence in Bennett being able to turn this team around and kind of make it so they're not last nationally in the passing yards?
So Bennett is known for turning around some bad defenses, and he certainly has his work cut out for him here, because they are a bad defense. They were, again, like you said, they were the worst pass defense in all of college football, and they found themselves in a lot of them, like shootout after shootout after shootout, that the defenses just could not hang on, and really were not helpful at all in holding down any other teams. In their losses, USC, 41 points they gave up there. Colorado, 40. Washington State, 37. Oregon, 54. Utah, 49. Washington, 44. And Arizona, 56. And that's just not going to cut it. I mean, that's just not acceptable. I mean, that's terrible. They gave up 33 touchdown passes. They pick off only 9 passes on the season. They allowed almost 14 yards per catch. 14 yards per catch. That's just no good. I mean, that's just no good. So they need to absolutely go back to the drawing board and see what they need to do to be able to get better this year. And I think that part of it's going to start with some pass rush to get some pressure on the quarterback. But I think at the same time, a lot of it's going to have to do with the secondary and what they're going to be able to do against opposing receivers and pass breakups and getting a couple more interceptions and things like that. The pass rush and the secondary, to me, are going to be the most important for this team to be successful.
It's funny that you say, well, hey, you know what, the secondary is going to be important, because when I look at their roster, the weakest part of the defense is the secondary. You have one returning starter in Marcus Ball, and that's because you have other starters in safety. Armand Perry retired this offseason. You have your top cornerback in Kareem Orr. Oh, wait, he's not with the team. He's now in Chattanooga doing the Chattanooga choo-choo now. You've got one guy returning, and that is Ball. And the thing that also doesn't help Bennett is usually you see a lot of coaches that are trying to build programs. I saw it a lot with Tim Beckman when he was with my Illinois Fighting Illini, was you see coaches go out and try to get infusions of JUCO transfers, guys from junior college or D1 transfers to kind of solidify some of your big positions. The secondary has none of these for ASU, and that's going to go a long way to kind of making this a tough kind of a rebuild year one for Phil Bennett, because he's not going to have those older guys to kind of rely on. He's going to have new guys stepping up into new roles. And I think this team is going to be, it starts at the line and moves back, where the line is good. The linebackers are decent, but it's a step back. And then the secondary is just awful this year. I don't see any way that this team overall flips the script. And you know how I said, oh, they were last nationally in passing yards? I don't see them flipping the script year one. This year for ASU on defense needs to be, hey, if we can get a little bit better, kind of get a little bit better, attack some of these things in recruiting so that next year maybe they do bring in some JUCO guys. Maybe they do bring in a D1 transfer to kind of focus on this secondary that may need it this year, because that's the one section of the defense I look at and I go, I'm not very excited for you guys in 2017.
I think that it helps that they've got their top two tacklers back this year. I think it helps that they've got some veterans up at the line.
Helps with your overall leadership.
Which is a great thing, and I think that they'll be better up front. But it's certainly in the secondary, they're going to be going with a lot of prospects. They're going to be going with a lot of guys who are going to be getting their shot. We could very well see a rotation back there in the secondary of who's good, who's not so good. We try this guy out, we try that guy out. It's going to be a lot of trial and error, I think, in the secondary, which really won't bode too well for Arizona State. But honestly, I think if Arizona State's able to win 8 games this season, they'd be pretty happy. 7 to 8 games for them, they would be ecstatic. They won 5 last year, 5-7, 2-7 in the conference, and this defense, so they need to get better. And they really do. To be competitive, they need to get better quick. But I just don't see that happening necessarily this year. I think up front they'll be better. I think up front they'll bring more pressure. But in the secondary, there's just not enough there of the guys that they currently have. Now, maybe they will get lucky. And the guys that they put in there,
just
trying to put in some puzzle pieces, they just absolutely. They really start to make an impact right away. But if they don't do that, then it's going to be a tough learning year for them.
And another thing that I look at, and I mean, this is going over to the offense now, I have a quote here from Todd Graham at ASU, because the last 2 seasons they've seen changes in their scheme offensively. And I mean, coming into this year, Todd Graham has said, and I quote, "We're a spread, no huddle, 11 personnel, run, play, action, pass team," end quote. And I look at that and I go, okay, that may be true on a foundation level, but this will be yet another year where you go through a transition, because you have your offensive coordinator in Chip Lindsey. He's now gone. He went from Tempe, Arizona. He is now in Auburn to go be with Gus Malzahn and the Auburn Tigers in the SEC. You bring in the wide receivers coach from Alabama and Billy Napier, and I say where he came from because quarterback-wise, there's a little bit of a choice that ASU has to go through this year. Notice how a lot of these previews, when we come to the offense, a lot of these teams, whether it's because people are leaving, whether it's because you know what we had last year, just I don't know if we can go through that again. We've been talking a lot about quarterback changes and guys that, do I pick this guy, do I pick that guy? And Arizona State is no stranger to that this offseason. They have a choice between this, Brandon. They can either go with their returning starter in Manny Wilkins, or they can go with the Alabama transfer in Blake Barnett. And the thing that I'm trying to look through right now to kind of weed through the grass is with the coach coming in from Alabama, Napier, could this be a good thing for Barnett to where, yeah, I know Manny Wilkins was there last year, but hey, you know what? This is a coach I know. I know the things that he's going to want to do because he's going to try to bring over a little bit some of the things that Nick Saban had done at Alabama. Basically, I'm going to ask you this. If you are Todd Graham, you are Billy Napier, who are you picking? Are you going with the returning starter in Manny Wilkins? Are you going with the Alabama transfer in Blake Barnett?
Well, I'll be honest with you. Right now, I'm going with Manny Wilkins. He's the one that you've seen produce anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, I mean, why would you go with somebody, Blake Barnett, who is, you have a small sample size, 200 and some yards, couple touchdowns. That's it. I mean, it's not like he's coming from Alabama as this guy who came over, he was the starter there, and now he's coming over here. You're not getting a situation like that.
You're not getting Jalen Hurts, is what you're saying.
No,
you're not getting the guy who was there and then coming back.
You're not getting the starter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you go with Manny Wilkins, who wasn't great. He only threw 12 touchdowns, 10 games, 12 touchdowns, 9
interceptions.
Picks. So that's got to get better, but that's why I think I would go Manny Wilkins if we had to go right now, but they're not going right now. I mean, I think they're going to wait deep into August to figure out who this guy's who the quarterback's going to end up being, who the starter's going to end up being. It may be Barnett, but I think that if you want to go with someone who is a bit of a track record, you go with Wilkins, and if he doesn't improve or you don't like what you're seeing from him, then you have to go over to Blake Barnett. But I don't see why there's any reason to not go with Wilkins to start off the season. Unless, of course, you're seeing a lot more from Barnett in the next couple of weeks. But if you don't, I say you go with Wilkins.
And I'm reading something right now off of Arizona Central, azcentral.com. And they have kind of a little bit of, first a quote from Billy Napier where he said, and I quote, "It's going to be a heck of a battle, man." And they kind of put in there, they're like, reading between the lines, basically, Wilkins has the right to be the starter. He hasn't done anything to say, you know what, you are not the starter coming into next year. However, on the flip side, Barnett has every reason in the playbook, every reason in the world to have the chance to take the job from Wilkins. It's not a solidified thing. And the thing that they put in that's important, and I'm going to read this quote for you, is it says, "In the past, Graham has placed a significant emphasis on leadership. He wants the quarterback who will evaluate the entire unit, not so much the quarterback who can handle defenders, Wilkins, or rifle a pass through a wall, Barnett. Both quarterbacks seem to have this quality locked in," end quote. And that's kind of where I was going to go with. Not exactly the leadership, but kind of the same model is the guy who's going to win this job, it will not be anything about the stats on the field. Like I want to say you mentioned with the Arizona preview, because we didn't talk about this with UCLA because they have their quarterback all locked up already. You can kind of take last year's stats to me, throw it out the window. Because you have a new coordinator coming in, it's which quarterback is A, going to fit in this system, and B, that right fit, where it feels right having him out there. And then number two, what they've just said in this article, where which one is going to lead your team effectively. Because, and I say throw the stats out, because let's be honest, Manny Wilkins' stats, yes, he's had more proven track record than Barnett, but you read off those stats, Brandon, and it's nothing that overly impresses me as an outsider to Arizona. It doesn't impress me that you have 12 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. So I look at it as, yes, they could go deep into August, but to me, it's whichever one out there you feel right and you go, you know what? I feel confident that we can win some football games with this guy in this system. based off of what I've seen in practice.
I mean, yeah. I completely agree. It's basically the same thing that I said. It's neither one of them is, a guy that just blows you away where you're like, wow, he's got to be out there starting. But I don't think that there'd be any reason not to give it to Manny Wilkins to start just because he's been the guy who's been there. Not that he has overly impressive stats, just that you know what you're going to get from him. You don't necessarily know what you're going to get from Barnett, but maybe that's why you throw him out there. But,
So are you saying maybe throw both out there in that New Mexico State game?
No, I'm not saying that.
Throw one out and then kind of see how it is, and the next game change it up if you don't like it? Or are you saying pick one and then boom, that's your guy for the whole year?
No, I didn't. None of that. You're not listening. So I said that I would go with Manny Wilkins because he is the one who's been there. He's got the track record. If you put him out there, you're not seeing exactly what you want to see. You think you can have a little bit more from Barnett, then you put him out there. And I'm not saying even in the same game, say maybe a couple of weeks in, stuff like that. But that's where I'm at on a situation like that. But again, you are in a position where you don't have a guy who is overly impressive. You don't have a guy who comes in with just these awesome stats and this great track record that comes with him. You don't have that. So it may just not necessarily matter what has been done in the past, but more what they see in their practices leading up to the season. That's what's going to be, I think, probably the deciding factor for them based on what you had just mentioned there in your quote and everything like that you read. That's what it sounds like to me.
I'll ask you this, kind of the last thing to kind of put a big kibosh on this one. The one thing we haven't looked at for Arizona State, the schedule. Let's say Manny Wilkins is your starter right now because he's the guy that they're putting in the number one spot at the moment. What do you think is the best case scenario for Arizona? What's the worst case? What's kind of if they do this win-wise, it's a successful season?
7 to 8 wins. 7 to 8 wins would be very successful for them. I think they need to get back to, a running attack and a rushing attack that last year saw a lot of touchdowns be put on the board, but 7 of those touchdowns came by one guy in the game against Texas Tech. But I think that if they can get back to a solid running game, a quarterback that, I'm not even going to say a quarterback that's in limbo, but a quarterback that maybe isn't putting out the stats that you want to see right away, you are able to help carry that team. And if they're able to do that, I think seven wins could be attainable.
I look at the schedule, and I kind of have a hard time seeing 7 wins on the schedule. I could see the same thing as last year. I could see 3-0 to start the season because their non-conference isn't super tough. Really depends on what kind of a team we see from Texas Tech this year. I know that one is on the road this year. But when I look at the Pac-12, the only teams they beat last year were Cal and UCLA. You want to know the big differences with those two teams to this year? The first one's obvious looking at the schedule. Cal's not there. You don't get to play Cal this year. The other thing, Josh Rosen could be healthy. There's both your wins. You got to find wins in different places. Oregon, like we've said, question mark. Stanford, to me, I think that would be a loss for them and a win for Stanford, but Stanford's another team where it's like, I don't know what to take of them completely coming in to this year. Maybe they win Oregon State and Arizona. I look at this conference though, and it's hard for me to see 4 wins on this because really that's what you would need for a 7-win season is 4 wins if you get 3 in the non-conference. I don't see that. I don't even see 3, let's say, just to get to a bowl game. So I wonder what it would feel like for Arizona if they basically do the same thing. If they win their non-conference 3-0, they go through, because I'm looking at it right now, if I had to give kind of a easy prediction of you win the first 3, You lose from Oregon to UCLA, you win the last two. So it's almost the same as last year, where, yeah, you had some losses in between your two wins, but you still had that streak of just losing when it came to conference games. I think that doesn't necessarily change this year. And the best I see this team going is yet again 5-7. The worst I see this team going is probably 2-3 wins. So from 2-3 to 5 is kind of the win total that I'm looking for in this team, which even if they got 5-7, like you said, that would not be a successful season for the Sun Devils.
No, I think that, again, they should win their first 3 games. Oregon, you could win that game. Colorado, I don't think is going to be as good as they were last season. There's a potential there. And then Oregon State and Arizona, I would put those as wins for Arizona State. So you could get to 7. 8 would be a real stretch. If you got to 8, that'd be like, whoa, wow, we didn't expect that, but that's nice.
Well, if they got to 8, it would be like, whoa, where did this team come from with the secondary that we talked about? But we're going to dish the conversation off to you guys. Let us know, what do you guys think? The defensive side, Arizona State fans, are you really worried about your secondary? Who would you pick to be your quarterback? Are you going with the Alabama transfer or the returning starter coming into this year? And really, what are you expecting from this year? Win total, what do you want to see from this year? What would equal a successful season for you? Let us know down below in the comment section. But Brandon, we are going to move on into the Utah Utes. Not one Utes, but 2 Utes. I make that joke every year. It's my cousin Vinny joke that I make every single year when we do this preview. Not 1, but 2 Utes.
You do.
I do. I love my cousin Vinny. I love making that joke, especially with the 2 Utes. 2 Utes. Not youths. It's Utes that he says in the movie. But we're going to be talking about the Utah Utes. And yet again, guys, are we feeling okay? It might be a little hot in here. We might be a little feverish. Because we're talking defense again to start a preview. And we're going to look at Utah's defense. This is a defense that last year, number 1 in the Pac-12 in rushing defense, and they were tied for 8th in the country with 43 sacks. Brandon, I'm just going to ask you plain and simple. Does this team this year, with the losses they experience, do they not get back to that, but do they kind of regain those numbers this year, or will we see a little step back from the defense in 2017?
I don't know, Ricky. I think that you lose 28.5 of those 43 sacks. The guys you had there to do that, they're now gone. And that's going to be tough to replace. That's going to be really tough to replace. The secondary loses a lot. This is a team that usually is looked at as being a team that is very good defensively. And I am certainly not saying that they won't be good defensively, but will they be 48th in defense last year good defensively? I'm not sure about that. I think that their linebacking core will be fine. They're going to move to a 4-2-5 alignment, which should be good against good ground games, which will be helpful. But will they be able to replace all the guys that they lost and be able to come back with the same production that they had last year? That's going to be tough. That's going to be tough to do. And not saying that they can't repeat it, but they're going to have a lot of guys step up right away to be able to do that. And will that be the case with Utah? They always seem to produce pretty good defensive players and have a pretty strong, solid defense. I think that they'll be around the same spot as last year, but they may not be quite up to par where they were last season. That's what I'll say.
And to me, those sack numbers are crucial because, like you said, 28 sacks they lose?
20.5.
They lose from last year. And the reason why I look at those is because of when you look at back, kind of like what we talked about with Arizona State a moment ago, when you look at this team, they're going to be in the midst of, we're in Chicago, we like to use a different word for this, but they're going to be in a complete rebuild when it comes to the secondary. It's not going to be a retool like we're used to here in Chicago. It is going to be a rebuild with their secondary. And the reason why those 28.5 sacks kind of jump out to me is because if this team is unable to get back to that production of getting after quarterbacks, that means quarterbacks are going to be up for longer. That means they are going to have more time to exploit your secondary, which of all the defensive units in this entire unit, they, coming into the season, look like they are most likely going to be the weakest coming into 2017. So the sack numbers need to be replaced by somebody. Somebody needs to step up into those roles, get after the quarterback. If they can get anywhere near to the 40-some that they had a year ago, then that might be able to mask the kind of weakness that they will have in the secondary, as the only guy, the exception to the secondary that they're bringing back is Chase Hansen. He's it. He's the safety. He was a quarterback but became a defensive star with Utah. Really, it's him. He's the only one in the secondary. Other than that, the entire unit is kind of, I don't want to say they're in shambles, but you're rebuilding this unit for a reason because there is nothing there around him. So that's why I look at those sack numbers and they have to get back to it. And it's more important because from what head coach Whittingham has said, he said, and I'll just say the quote, "We're not going to apologize for winning 9+ games the last 3 years, but we want to win a championship. We've got to find a way to break through," end quote. And I know this kind of speaks into a greater kind of more so than just the defense, but I feel like if you can't get those sack numbers to where they were and people exploit your secondary, you're not going to be able to break through and you're not going to be able to get to a championship, whether that be Pac-12 or college football.
No, I completely agree with you, and I think that that's where we have to then kind of bounce it over to the offensive side of things and, talk a little bit about what they're going to be able to do there. They lose running back Joe Williams. They lose him. Zach Moss is going to be the guy most likely to lead the running back unit, and then Troy Williams, the junior, will be the guy at quarterback, and he's been pretty consistent, but he needs to be a little bit more consistent. Like last year, one of the games, and it was against Oregon State, I think he goes 4 of 13 passing. I mean, a game like that, you just can't have that. That's not going to do you a bit of good. I think being more consistent and coming to play with some solid numbers each and every game, that's what you need to be able to bring to your team.
And the thing that I look at offensively, like you bring up Williams, I look at another guy, 2 Troys on one team. Talk about 2 Utes. We're talking about 2 Troys here as his coach, offensive coordinator coming in, Troy Taylor, the 8th play caller in 9 seasons for Utah. 9 seasons, you've had 8 different play callers. So he's going to have he hasn't been there all 8 years, but another new play caller, one that he didn't have last year. And the thing that I think Troy Williams is going to help this team with, and this kind of leads to that quote from Whittingham, is they need to keep the consistency going. Because one of the big games that they're going to have, and I'm only putting a focus on this one, is October 14th. They're going to go to USC. Williams, to me, is going to be key, not just this season, but in that game, because not only have they won over USC before, they've beaten them twice in the past 3 seasons. And there's no way you can talk championship, whether it's in the Pac-12, whether it's in college football, whether it's national, whether it's conference. You can't talk about that and lose to USC because of what we talked about in the UCLA one of they're going to be coming back. So really, I look at this conference and Utah kind of begins it. UCLA begun it. This is kind of continuing the conversation. We might be in a 4-team race because it could be the 2 California teams, Colorado and Utah, that are all vying for a possible Pac-12 South Division championship. In the end, though, the real question comes down to who's going to challenge the California teams. Is it going to be Utah or is it going to be Colorado? And for Utah, it starts with Troy Williams. He's the one that has to make it to where, yes, they can challenge UCLA and USC.
And I think that a great point to bring up is the fact that he was so good in the win against USC last year. And in that win, I mean, it goes to show he's got the leadership, the toughness, the skill, the ability, the mobility, like all those things he showed in that game, and he has shown. But then as I go back to, he completes 4 of 13 passes against Oregon State. Oregon State, okay? That's not good. Things like that cannot happen. You
So
can't
consistency needs to be there.
But you have to. You just beat USC. You can't then lose to a team that you were supposed to beat.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think people say you have to beat USC. No, if you beat them, that's great. That's plus. But if you lose to Oregon State, that is not good. That was not supposed to happen. That's a loss that was not supposed to be on your schedule. And I think that you need to win the games you're supposed to win.
That's exactly it.
And you have to be competitive and maybe get a win in a game that maybe you weren't supposed to win. That's when you end up having a good season.
Well, and it kind of brings me to how many times with us, in our past, in college and post-college, we've called collegiate basketball and football games together. And how many times did me and you talking, or we're talking to the coach after the game, and they say, well, this was a game we just played up to our opponent. Played up to the opponent, got the win. Or, and this is the most cases that we've had to deal with, is, Coach, why was this game so hard? We just played down to our opponent today. We really played down. We should have played better than what we did. And you can't have that if you're Utah, because with Utah, they're not going to be a team like, and people are going to get upset that I keep bringing them up, but they are the staple for this example. Utah's not Alabama. They're not a team where you could walk into a schedule and go, yes, win every game. I could see a win in every single game for this team. They're not a team that they walk into the building and they are the favorite to win that game just because they're the Utah Utes. They're a team where some games they're going to be the underdog, some games they are going to be the favorite in that game. And if you are the favorite, Oregon State, for example, don't play down to your opponent. Don't play down, play to where you are at. However, if you're going up against, like last year, they went up against guys like number 9 Colorado, number 4 Washington. They they played against USC. That one was at home. Play up to those opponents. Play up, put a little oomph, a little gusto into those games to try to get those wins, because that is going to make you a successful team moving forward. And I look at their schedule this year. Very similar to the ones that we've looked at already. Of course, they're going to have all the same South opponents, but the thing I find interesting is they have on the docket Washington. They're a team where it's like, oh, they don't have Washington on there. Some South teams, yes, you do. They are in the boat of a UCLA again. Not only do you have to play USC and UCLA this year, which UCLA should be better with a healthy Josh Rosen, you also end the year at Washington and then at home against Colorado, 2 teams that you did not beat a year ago.
A really interesting thing when you're talking about the schedule is the fact that the Utes don't play Oregon State this year, and they don't play Cal, and they get the 4 best teams. They have Stanford and Washington State, who will come and play in Salt Lake City, but then they go to Oregon, they go to Washington, and they go to USC. They've got a tough schedule. I mean, there's no getting around that. They have a very, very difficult schedule. They'll start the season most likely 4-0, but then you get to Stanford. Stanford comes to you, and then it's right on to USC, Arizona State. I think a team you'll beat. Oregon on the road, a team that I'm not sure yet about Oregon.
I'm
not sure yet about Oregon because of the fact that they are a team that the last couple of years, ever since they were in the championship game, they've been one of those teams that's kind of been there, not so much, fallen off the radar.
You know the saying where they usually say this isn't your granddad's, and then they put the team in there, basically saying this isn't the team you saw a long time ago. The thing I'm going to say for Oregon this year is this is not your older brother's Oregon team, because it's not far enough to be your granddad's team, but this isn't the Oregon team that was like Chip Kelly.
I was going to say this isn't your Chip Kelly Oregon football team. That's exactly what it is. It's not Chip Kelly who has this high flying offense team. Just everything's working for him. That's not Oregon. Not to say that Oregon won't be a tough opponent, but that's just not Oregon right now. UCLA is going to be very difficult. Washington State, not sure yet if they're going to come back again and be a team that is one to be reckoned with. Washington most likely will be good again, and Colorado, I think, falls off from where they were last year.
Colorado's the iffy one, because I think when we say fall off, I don't think they're going to fall off the wagon completely. When I say fall off, they're not going to win the division, but they could be the fourth best team in this division. And some people might say, well, Ricky, to me, that's falling off the wagon. No, if you're one of the top 4 teams in this division, you have not completely fallen off the wagon. However, if Utah doesn't play well, especially coming off of a potential loss to Washington, how will they play in that last game? The deck is stacked against Utah, I will say that. The secondary issues that we have planned out, yes, they have a quarterback that they can call their own, but yet again, a new play caller comes into the offensive fold, and they have one of the toughest schedules when it comes to the Pac-12. Like you said, 4 best teams: Stanford, Washington, Colorado, UCLA, and USC coming into this year. I said 4, I meant 5. Coming into this season of potential games, I look at the schedule, and at the best, maybe I see, unless you steal one of those 5 games, at best, 5 or 6 wins. And to me, the question is the Oregon-Washington State opponents. How do you do against those two? That's the big question for me, are those games, because otherwise I see this team going 4-0, losing 2, winning 2, lose, win, lose, lose. So 6 wins at the most, that's what I see, and that would not be a successful season for a team that Whittingham has said we're not going to apologize for winning 9 games in the last 3 seasons where they're used to. Before we move on, any last thoughts you have for the Utah Utes?
My final comment is that success for Utah would be another 9-win season, something that they could do. I mean, I've already looked at 6 wins for sure I think they should get. And then, they played USC tough last year. They beat them last year. Will they be able to do the same thing again this year? If they can do that and they can beat USC, that's going to set a tone for the rest of their season when they have Oregon and UCLA, Washington State, and Washington to follow that. So that'll be a great tone setter if they're able to do that. If they don't get the win there, that's going to be pretty tough to be able to try and stay in the top, towards the top with the rest of the guys. Not that they won't, but you certainly won't be the number 1 or the number 2 team then.
Well, and this is where I want to throw it on to you guys. Let us know what you think down below about the Utah Utes. Is the secondary that big of a concern? Are they going to make up for the loss in sack numbers that they lose from players leaving the team from last year? And also about the schedule. How many wins do you see? What's a successful win for Utah? Let us know down below in the comment section. And Brandon, now we get to talk about the team I have waited for. This team should really have been the last team. However, they didn't win the Pac-12 South, so technically they can't be the last team. That will be Colorado. However, we get to talk about the USC Trojans. And this one, much like the UCLA Bruins, we have an easy starting point here. Nothing to get too excited about or too what are we going to, what's the first starting point for this one? The first starting point is Sam Darnold. Coming into his redshirt sophomore season with the Trojans. Last year, just over 3,000 yards, 31 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. I'm going to ask you this. I'm just going to be frank. What's the percentage, or should Trojan fans be thinking college football playoff with Darnold from week 1?
Yeah, there's no reason why they shouldn't be. He gave them all that hope and all that excitement and the belief in a college football playoff in that Rose Bowl game. That's what he did. He was doing it probably well before that, but he certainly solidified it.
The most
in the Rose
exciting
Bowl
postseason game that we saw last year outside of the national championship.
I don't see how a USC fan doesn't come into this season with complete confidence that you're going to get there.
I do, and I'm not even a USC fan because I'm looking at the schedule right now, and I know that usually before we get into the schedule, we talk about like, well, what other pieces do they have? But this team, to me, the only games I worry about are UCLA at the end of the year, Texas on September 16th, and Stanford on September 9th. Because Western Michigan, if PJ Fleck was still there, I might have been like, well, you know what? That might be a game. I don't think Western Michigan stands a chance. Stanford could be tough just because Stanford, are they going to be mediocre or are they going to be one of the top teams in the Pac-12? I don't quite know yet this year. Texas, what are they going to be under Tom Herman in year 1? The rest of the schedule until USC at the end of the year, I could see being wins all the way down the schedule for the Trojans because I know they beat them last year, but what team do they not have on the schedule this year and will not face them unless they see them in the Pac-12 title game? The Huskies. They don't have the Huskies this year. They don't have to worry about Jake Browning and Washington. They can say, you know what, we'll focus on our side. We'll see you in the Pac-12 title game if you get there.
See, I don't have the same concern with Texas that you do. The team that stands out to me is Stanford at the beginning of the season and then UCLA at the end. I don't see another team in there that's going to really put up a whole mess of a fight. Utah could be interesting just because of how Utah played them last year.
Like we said, I will give respect to Utah. They have beaten them twice in the past 3 years.
But Texas, Tom Herman's still working with Charlie Strong's guys, and I just don't see Texas being all that big of a threat to USC.
All that in a bag of potato chips?
I'd like to say that Notre Dame might give them the game, but that's just not going to happen. We know that.
And that's usually a big rivalry game between the two.
Yeah, well, it probably won't be. It won't be. But Stanford, Utah, and UCLA, those are the 3 contests that USC is going to have the biggest tests. And it's going to be really interesting. And we haven't even talked about Stanford yet, but UCLA, that is the game that I would look at as the most exciting game on this schedule for USC because, like you said, it's going to be Darnold v. Rosen. Hopefully, if he's not
healthy.
Injured. But that is going to be, you assume he's going to have a very good, healthy season. And those two guys meet up at the very end. And if things go well, like we think that they could go for UCLA with a healthy Rosen the entire season, and you have Darnold go a full healthy season, these two guys meet up, it could potentially be number 1 v. number 2 picks in the draft. It very well could be.
Depending on how Josh Allen is.
Yeah, throw him out of this conversation. But this could be a huge game. And it would be the battle of LA. And I think that it ends up being and having a huge impact on the rest of I say the rest of the season, but where those teams go then.
No, and
who wins that side? Who's going to end up being in the Pac-12 championship game? And then who ends up going to the playoff?
Well, and the thing I wanted to touch on with that when it comes to USC is not only am I really high on the Trojans, like I told you coming into recording this segment that although we have not made our official predictions, I'm starting to think about teams that I could see in the college football playoff. And based off of right now kind of my 1.0 in my head, I'm kind of coming up with divisions that I could see getting college football playoff team from. The SEC will have one, will most likely be Alabama. The Big Ten will have one, whether it's Ohio State, Penn State, or Michigan. The Pac-12 should have one, whether it's UCLA, USC, or Washington. And then to me, the other one, I'm going to say maybe it's a toss-up between the ACC and the Big 12. Me leaning a little bit more towards an ACC team getting through. I might be riding Miami a little bit in there. I'm not quite sure. But the thing with USC, they are my favorite Pac-12 team when it comes to the college football playoff race. And the majority of it is because of this schedule that we've talked about. Not only do they have the guy who is going to be an early favorite for the Heisman, he's right now in way too early as he is the number one pick in the NFL draft, but Coach Clay Helton has also done a great job recruiting. He's had 2 straight top 10 classes, and because the Trojans have been freed of their NCAA sanctions, they have a chance to go to the college football playoff. And I think that the schedule matched up with the recruiting classes that he's able to put together because of being freed of the sanctions is going to be the driving force for this USC team. And I kind of have a feeling that if they do not make the playoffs, I'm going to stop myself before I say this. If they do not make the Pac-12 championship game, it will be a failure in the eyes of Trojan fans, because that will either mean they have lost more than one Pac-12 conference game, or they lost to UCLA at the end of the year, and that's what kept them out. The only thing that would not be a failure completely is if they went to the Pac-12 title and lost a thrilling game to, let's say, a Washington who could be there, or let's say a Stanford or somebody coming over from the north. But this team, to me, Pac-12 side of it, is really they're in the driver's seat to get to the conference title game and could be in the driver's seat to get to the college football playoff from the Pac-12.
This is a team that has just so much potential, and there's so much excitement and buzz around this team again. And a year ago, I mean, I think, obviously we were in a different position. We were talking about Max Brown and the potential that he would be able to have for this team. He's now with Pitt. He's not even on USC anymore. And you have to take a look at Sam Darnold, and his stats aren't even for a completely full season. He wasn't the starter from day one. And he's still over 3,000 yards and 31 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. And that was with him slinging the football all over the field. And I really do believe that for Sam Darnold to really take it to the next level, what he'll want to do is he'll want to just a very small notch, be a bit more conservative. I mean, as we even saw with both him and McSorley from Penn State, is they were just slinging the ball all over the place. And there were some interceptions on both sides. For Darnold to just cut down on that just a little bit and maybe hold on to the football just a second longer. And it's not because he threw too many interceptions. He only threw 9 interceptions to 31 touchdowns.
Yeah.
But for him to take that next step, that's what I think he's going to want to do. Be just a bit more concerned. I mean, not even a lot. Just maybe a half a notch. And that's for him to not feel like he has to sling the football all over the place. For him to feel like he doesn't have to, throw that ball into a double coverage. Maybe you just pull it down and run for a couple of yards, or maybe you go for the underneath look. And that's just what you're going to do as you grow up, as you mature, and everything like that. As a quarterback, that's what you're going to start to do. But for him too, that he's going to be able to have some time, because USC gave up only 12 sacks on the season. 12 sacks on the season. Now, some of those guys from that offensive line are gone. But if they're able to have anywhere near the success that they did last year on that offensive line, only 12 sacks, that's so impressive.
And that's the thing I wanted to throw out.
He's going to be safe, and he's going to have the time to be able to do what he needs to do, to go through his reads, to look at his deep route. Okay, double covered, come back. Who's the underneath route? Who do I want to go as, to on the shorter, on a curl route, something like that? You have the time to be able to do that.
And the one thing I wanted to throw out was they do lose 4 key starters on this offense. 2 offensive linemen, 2 wide receivers, where you have starting tackles Zach Banner and Chad Wheeler. Zach Banner is now in the NFL. And then receivers, you have Juju Smith-Schuster, NFL, and Darius Rogers. They're all gone. So you lose the 2 guys, Banner being the more profound one, because he was the one that everyone was talking about. NFL draft buzz that played into those sack numbers being so low against the offense. But really, this offense, the biggest thing that they will have to overcome is the wide receiver position, because you have Darnold coming back. Running back wise, you have Ronald Jones II, or RJ2 as I'm going to call him all year. He comes back, you're fine. You're solidified at the running back position. To me, it comes to Deontay Burnett, Michael Pittman, and Velus Jones. Can 2 of you guys step up and give the production that we saw from Juju Smith and Darius Rogers last year to be the top two of the top 2 guys that Darnold can throw to? Because if he doesn't have anyone that can throw to, we could talk college football playoff till we're blue in the face. Also, defensively, the thing I wanted to mention was my biggest concern defensively is the nose tackle position. They lose a guy who came over from Utah as a graduate transfer, solidified double teams last season for the offensive line. Basically, when you solidify double teams, you're opening the line up for other guys to slide through, basically because you're taking up 2 people and not 1. And it's going to be the question of who is going to take over, because there's 2 guys. There's Kenny Bajello, however, he's coming off of an ACL injury, but then there's Marion Tupalutu, who he's a true freshman coming in. So really, that's the only thing defensively I look at is, do you go with the true freshman? Will the guy coming off the ACL injury step up? That nose tackle position on defense is the big one that I could see being, you're probably going to rotate them to see which one it is that's your nose tackle, but they're going to need someone to be on that defensive side, taking up some double teams to open up those lanes so that they can get to the quarterback, get to the running back.
And the part of the defense that's still going to be strong even after losing Adoree Jackson is going to be in the secondary at the cornerback position, because then Amon Marshall just moves over. And doesn't have to move over, but you have had him on the other side that you look at and go, okay, he's going to slot into the number 1 position now. And they'll be fine. They may not have that same spark that they had with Adoree Jackson, but they're still going to be a good secondary. I think they're still going to have a lot of really good talent, and that's going to be their strength defensively, should be. But with what you just said, it's a concern, but it's not something that you go, they're going to just fall apart defensively.
It's nothing like Arizona and Arizona State where we're like, crap, their secondary is nothing and we're panicking about it. But I look at it and I go, it's nice to have that guy that can take double teams away from an offensive line and open up holes so that you can get guys flustered and throw them into mistakes against your loaded secondary.
What USC is going to have to do is they're going to have to get more of a pass rush. They only had 26 sacks last year, which was the fewest since 2010 when they had 27. And in 2015, they had 37 sacks. So they need to be able to get to the quarterback. And that kind of goes along with exactly what you're saying, is get to the quarterback, and whether you're sacking him or just forcing the quarterback to throw a pass that he doesn't really want to throw but does it anyways because of the pressure, that's what they need to be able to do. And if they can do that, then they're going to have success on the defensive side of the football because of the fact that secondary is going to still be a very solid unit.
Well, and that's what you see a lot from quarterbacks, unless it's like the guys like the one that I always knew that was the best at it, and he's still good with it in the NFL, is Andrew Luck, where there's not a lot of quarterbacks that sense the pressure, roll out, throw it away, live to see another down. You either fall into two categories. There's guys that want to stay in that pocket long enough. The guy that did it the best, Peyton Manning, another guy who was successful in the NFL, where I'm going to stay, throw it, and then get hit. However, some guys hold on to it too long and take the sack. There are other guys that get flustered by it. Oh, I got to throw it. They throw it quicker than they want to, leads to turnovers, tip passes, deflected balls, this, that, and the other, so that they are not able to throw the passes that they want to. And I don't see a lot of quarterbacks other than maybe Josh Rosen having that sense of mind to be the guy that's not going to either be A or B, holding on to the ball too long or throwing it away into a defender's hands.
And then for this team, I think that success for them is winning their side of the conference, winning the Pac-12 altogether, and making it to the college football playoff.
No.
If you have anything less than the college football playoff this year, it is not a winning season for you.
Here's the thing I'm going to ask you, though, and this will go back to something I said earlier in this part of the preview, is, of course, college football playoff is on the mind. That's the goal. However, let's say you go to a Pac-12 title game. You play a phenomenal game against Washington. You lose on a last-second field goal. Are you sitting there going, complete failure? Are you saying, you know what, we failed at our goal, but this was still a successful season?
No, you're a fan. You want the college football playoff. And don't give me these theoreticals. I'm not going to answer them.
What if you're not a fan? What if you're a player?
I'm not going to answer them.
So it's a complete waste if you don't get to the college football playoff?
Yes.
I'm going to go on the other side. That's the goal.
I think that
they can have a successful season without getting there.
Yes, but still, I think that a fan, a player, they're going to be like, yeah, great. We had we had a great win here. We had a great win here. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean anything. We didn't make it to the college football playoff. We might as well just lost those and just have the season done before we had to be crushed here at the end. That's I think how a player would look at it. Great. We had another nice season. And guess what we got to? A bowl game. That means nothing.
And then they go play Penn State and they give us one of the best performances ever. But
the Rose Bowl is not a bowl game that means nothing. But if you go and you're in the TurboTax Bowl, that doesn't mean a whole lot.
Let's be honest. If they lose to Washington and Washington goes to the college football playoff and they don't, USC is going to be in the Rose Bowl because the Pac-12 team's always in the Rose Bowl.
True, but still what I'm saying is the point is you didn't make it to your goal.
You do want, I will say this, you do want the college football playoff, and this is a team that I'm going to say 85% at the least chance for me to make the college football playoff. And when we do make our predictions, they're probably going to be a team that I put into one of the slots for my college football playoff predictions. But we want to turn it on to you guys. Let us know, what are your odds of them making the college football playoff? What do you look at is going to be the strength for USC? What's not going to be the strength for them? How do you see this season playing out for the Trojans? Let us know down below in the comment section. But Brandon, let's end the podcast talking about last year's Pac-12 South champion, and that will be the Colorado Buffaloes. And for every team except for the two California teams, we're going to focus on defense. Yes, we are feeling fine. The defenses just need to be talked about in this division. And the big thing for Colorado to kind of set things up is they're going to have a new coordinator coming in, former Kentucky coordinator DJ Elliott. He's going to take over a defense, Brandon, that was top 20 nationally in scoring and total defense. However, it's going to be a hard road to keep the Buffaloes in the top 25 this year. I'm going to be playing simple. They're not making a scheme change. They're still going to be 3-4. He's going to keep the Colorado terminology intact. Will that be enough to keep the Buffaloes a top 20 defense in 2017?
So again, like you said, they were 19th in total D last year, and they were very, very good, and that's why they were 8-1 in the conference in 10-4 overall. It was their defense, no doubt about it. But the biggest issue, it comes down to the secondary. So they lose three, not one, three all-star caliber playmakers to the nation's 5th most efficient pass defense. Now that's pretty big. Afolabi Laguda returns, though, at one safety position, and they're hoping that the replacements will fill in and they will catch on very quickly. That's the hope for Colorado, and they're going to have to. But they also have special team star Ryan Moeller at safety, and Isaiah Olivers are going to fill in another corner position. So they already have some guys picked out that they think will be able to fill the hole, fill the voids of some of those guys who are leaving. But that's not to say that they're going to feel it a little bit that those guys are gone. So that's going to be an interesting, probably work in progress for the first part of the season. And that's where we'll see how will Colorado react to that in the first part of the season. Will they be able to still pick up a couple of wins? Will we see a significant drop-off defensively that we did not see last year because of how solid, rock solid they were on the defensive front? So that's where I think coming in and being able to do a lot up front is going to be crucial. Being able to get a lot of pressure up front, being able to get a lot of good pass rush is going to take a lot of pressure off a secondary that's going to be in some transition. So if they're able to do that, they may be fine. But if they can't, and the secondary is exposed, that's where we really could see ourselves saying Colorado is really going to fall off.
So it's a theme here. Another defense that we're unsure about, and it's the secondary that we're looking at that could be the Achilles heel. And right now I'm looking at the schedule, and the schedule makers in the Pac-12 didn't do them any favors because based off of just passing, here are some of the quarterbacks that they're going to see this season. Washington, so they'll see Jake Browning. At UCLA, they'll see Josh Rosen. At Washington, they are going to see Falk and the Cougars. And then they're also going to be playing the Trojans, and they will see Sam Darnold. That is 4 quarterbacks that I think could get the better of this Buffalo team. And the thing with Buffalo coming into this year, and like I told you before we started to record this podcast, was basically I don't know how to feel about Buffalo this season. I don't know if I should make them like, yes, they will compete for the Pac-12 crown, or it's like, oh, they won it last year, but this year they're going to be the 4th best team in the division or the 3rd best team in the division based on whichever one of them, Utah or Colorado, does better. I just look at the defense, like you said, losing pieces, having a new coordinator come in. Yes, not changing the terminology will help, but really you got to find guys to fill in the pieces that you're going to miss. Also on offense, the big thing is they have a 4-year starter leaving who adds huge leadership to that team. He's gone. And now you have Steven Montez being your quarterback who, yes, he's a confident sophomore because he went 2-1 last year as a starter and had to play when your starter was injured last year. But this will be his first year kind of playing in that starting role. And when it comes down to him, he's got a gunslinger mentality, which means to me he's got to improve one thing, and that's the decision making. This could be a quarterback that, when quarterbacks have that gunslinger mentality, when I think of gunslingers, I usually like the prototypical one I think in my head is Brett Favre. Brett Favre was a guy, man, threw a lot of touchdowns, but hell yeah, threw a lot of interceptions as well. I worry about that this year for Colorado, that if because they have this gunslinger at quarterback, are they going to be giving up the ball too much to defenses, and then that forces their defense to be on the field more, having to stop opposing offenses, especially in those 4 games I mentioned, Washington, Washington State, UCLA, and USC.
One thing that Colorado did a really good job of last year was being able to manage the tempo of games. And that's something that kept them in so many games. That's why they were able to pick up so many victories, and I think shock a lot of people last year to go 10-4 overall and then 8-1 in conference. Is they did a really good job of managing the clock. And that's because being able to have a really good running back in Phillip Lindsay, that helps. And now you've got an offensive line that last year was not great. They were okay, but they were not great. But this year now, you have 4 starters returning. Hopefully they learned a lot from last year, able to put that into practice this year, and are able to get better. They need to be better than what they were last year. But again, they weren't terrible, but they weren't wonderful. So that needs to happen. And giving Phillip Lindsay more running room and giving him more holes, that's really going to help out. And then at the quarterback position, you've got Steven Montez, who I think, Ricky, his toughest days are behind him. When they threw him into the fire last year after the injury at quarterback, I think now, going forward, it's just going to get easier.
Because you're the starter. You don't have to worry about the starter coming back.
Exactly. Your top 9 receivers return. You know who you're throwing to. This offense could still be very good. And it will be interesting to see what they're able to do, but I still don't think that they're the 10-4 they were last year, especially when you look at this schedule.
Yeah, and I don't either, because the thing that this season's going to come down to for the Buffaloes is, yes, you're experienced on offense, and yes, there's a lot of excitement around the potential of Montez. However, I look at the losses on defense, and the thing that doesn't sit right for me for some reason is I know what you guys are going to say, but Ricky, he didn't have a large sample size. 9-5 touchdown to INT ratio. I know that's 1 touchdown away from being 2-1, but I have a feeling that Montez might get into being a younger quarterback, being that gunslinger mentality, might get into a kind of mindset of, I can do it. And the thing that might work as a negative for him is it's going to be a positive yet a negative. Kind of like what they say, it's a blessing but a curse. Yeah, he's got all these weapons around him, but there might be a time where, because he's so young and because he has the mentality he does, he might be looking down the field going, you know what? I know my guy down there. I know he's good. I'm going to press it. And he throws it, leads to a pick, leads to a play that goes against Colorado, rather than, you know what, check down route, live to see another down, and go for the big play. I wonder if that's going to be the offense this year because of the personnel that they have and the guy that they have at quarterback. And I can't wait to see the turnover numbers, the differential for this year, because I kind of have a feeling, if I'm going to predict anything, that their turnover differential this year might be a negative number and not a positive number because of turnovers on the offensive side of the ball.
And you may not be wrong there. You definitely may not be wrong there, but at the same time, too, I think that Montez had a lot of good experience last year with being thrown into the fire, and hopefully he got a lot of his, I don't want to say kinks, but hopefully you get out a lot of your jitters and a lot of your mistakes in that time, and then he's able to grow up fast, and I think Colorado right now, a team that if they want to keep winning, they need that to happen.
Well, and that's the thing I will, like, the kind of devil's advocate to my own point is, for example, the UCLA game. I'm going to use that as kind of the microcosm here. Threw 3 passes, completed 1, but also threw an interception. However, only threw 3 passes. Then you look at also the Michigan game. Yeah, he went 0 for 7, but he only threw 7 passes. Idaho State only threw 10 passes. Washington only threw 12 passes. That was another one where he came in, and then at halftime they went back to the starter, And the starter threw a pick and a pick six and really put the game out of reach for the Buffalo. And I wonder if being the starter this year, the kind of devil's advocate side of it might be, well, he's not going to be thrown into the fire this year. He's going to be the starter from the opening minute and can kind of settle into the game rather than be, well, they got your starters out. Montez, get on in there, and have him run in to a game that is already maybe lopsided on one side. It's a close game and you're trailing in the game, and it takes a while to where it's like, well, I can't settle into the game because the game is already started and already going. Being the starter, he can kind of settle into games a little bit easier being a 0-0 contest.
Exactly. And now, Ricky, let's take a look again at this Colorado-Buffalo schedule.
Okay.
Their first 3 games I would see as wins.
Mm-hmm.
So you start out 3-0. Arizona you have there's a 4th win, Oregon State a 5th win, Cal a 6th win, and then Arizona State a 7th win. And I would say this year for Colorado, 7 to 8 wins would be very good for them.
I'm going to say similar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, the 7 that you listed, I could see as wins. The big one to me that is going to determine 7 or 8 is the Utah game at the end of the year. Beat Utah, obviously it's 8. Lose to Utah, obviously it's 7. The other games, though, Washington, UCLA, Washington State, and USC, because of the losses on defense, because of a younger quarterback, and because of the teams you are going up against, at this point, I might put 0-4 into those games, especially the 2 California teams. I would take Darnold and Rosen over Montez and the Buffalo this year. Washington will be interesting because are they going to be as good as they were last year? I know they'll still have Jake Browning back leading that offense. And then Washington State, that's a road game for them. And also Washington State has a quarterback that will be in the NFL draft discussion at some level. Maybe not top 5, but he is going to be a guy that we talk about come NFL draft time. Those are the 4 games on top of the Utah. So they have 5 games where right now I'm putting a 1-5 at best in those 4 because the other ones, maybe Washington State, okay, 2-3 at best in those 5 games, but those are going to be the ones that kind of solidify what kind of a season we have for Colorado at the end after November 25th.
I completely agree with you. I feel like some of the games that Colorado won last year, they may not necessarily be able to pick up again this year, especially with a secondary that I'm not saying that they're going to be bad, but they're not going to be up to the standard that they were at last year.
And when you're going up against, especially in those 4 games I listed, 4 quarterbacks who are NFL draft worthy. I would say Browning, Rosen, Falk, and Darnold, all NFL draft worthy or NFL futures in their own individual futures going forward. So, I mean, that's going to be hard for them to overcome. However, what will we see from the offense? Can the offense keep them in the games? And really, for the offense, the only thing I worry about, and like I've said, is the turnover numbers. But before we push it onto them, Brandon, any final thoughts you have about the Colorado Buffalo?
No.
You guys know the deal. This is where we push it onto you guys. Let us know down below. What do you think about the defense for Colorado and the losses? How confident are you in Montez? I really want to get the pulse of a Colorado fan with your excitement. Are you excited? Are you not excited for Montez? What are you worried about when it comes to your young quarterback? Let us know what you think for Colorado ending the season. What record do you see? How do you see the season playing out? And also, thank you if you listen to the podcast fully on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, iTunes, or Stitcher. Thank you guys for sticking around with us. Another successful primetime podcast here. We will be back next week. I will be back. Brandon will be on vacation. You know where you're going this time, or you just staying around for an old staycation, as they call it?
No, I will be going to Marco Island in Florida.
Wow. Going to Florida. Our Florida fans love us when it comes to our Gator and our Hurricane preview. So maybe you'll see Brandon walking around the streets. Who knows? But I want to thank you guys for the watching or listening. And as always, have a good day, everybody.